Good morning. And I say thank you to Bonnie and to everyone else, and I guess Larry and Ray and whoever else got their lives shifted around and changed to make it possible for me to be with you this month, even though I was only here 2 weeks ago, the last Sunday of the month. And Reverend Bonnie mentioned at the end of my talk last month, she said something about Peggy almost always leads us into the next month's theme. And I watched my talk, as well as hers, on the YouTube video that she's reminding you that our talks are available there on the spiritual pathways. And boy, was she right. I didn't realize how much my talk that was supposed to be on altruism and focusing on doing good to do well and being able to bring more of the kingdom of heaven into your life was really about the need to connect to the divine and get centered with that first and go within. Anyway, the divining the divine will, to me, that theme imparts sort of a how-to question, like how do you divine the divine will? And the title of my talk today is Just Ask. Larry asked me outside, so what's the title of your talk? I said, Just Ask. He said, I just did. I said, yeah, just ask. He said, oh, I get it. It's like, who's on first? But anyway, and Skip did the same thing, because he asked me the title of the talk to put it on the CD and for Randy to have for the DVD and the video and all of that. So divining the divine will, to me, I'm always wanting to share with you what I found works for me or what I've observed works for others and offer it up however it works for you or doesn't work. Keep trying. You know? But I found that asking is my best solution for divining the divine will. I come from a family that are very cerebral in a lot of ways, and I have always had this kind of reputation in the family of overthinking things. So my mother called it paralysis by analysis. My father called it overthinking, but whichever way you want to look at it, that would be too much rumination, too much thinking, too much intentionality of my own human brain, which is probably why, I didn't believe in God until I got in the 12-step programs and was an atheist, because I thought I was the one who had to do it all. I was the one who was in control. So I had to think up the solutions to the problems. I had to figure out what it was. And so, of course, I was very willful. When you talk about divining the divine will, what's the difference between my will and thy will? Well, that's, I guess, part of what Bonnie was reading to us about this morning from this thing called you. How do I divine the difference between the divine and me? Or is there a difference? Well, I would submit to you that I'm not so sure that there is a huge difference, because I think we are one with the Spirit. So my thoughts are God's thoughts. My life is thy life. This is God's life now that I'm living, that you're living, that we're all providing the experience for Spirit through the physical form that we've all manifested. But back to my way of processing this, I realized that, it's thinking is my challenge. I was going to say problem until Bonnie read that pure principle has no problems. And I realized, okay, well, that's why we chose the word challenge, I guess, in our movement. The thinking is both the solution and the problem in my world. But when I'm looking at my own thought and ultimately trying to decide, okay, who's doing the thinking here? And am I thinking the highest level of thought? Am I thinking the divine thought, or am I thinking my own thought? So a number of the tools that I have stepped into over the years has more to do with asking these kinds of questions of myself rather than assuming that I have the answer. Because I learned a long time ago, as we say in the 12-step programs, my best thinking got me here. And I always like to say it, my best thinking up to now got me here. So I recognized from an early on stage that I overthink things, and then learning how to develop a level of spirituality and the evolution of my soul, I've discovered more about the need for letting go of my best thinking and being able to move into what is the highest thought that I might have, and is that the thought that is closer to the divine? Is that closer to the divine will? And what I've learned really is that the quality of my life, and I would submit this to you and to anyone, that the quality of our lives is pretty directly proportional to the quality of the questions we ask ourselves. So when I say just ask, I'm talking about just asking in all sorts of ways in our lives. but I'm also talking about asking the divine to reveal itself through me, as me, to me, for me, in the more specific sense of the topic today. So I've used a number of things over time, and still do, as a way of getting my thinking out of the way, to be able to move myself apart from what I thought was the best idea, or what Sandy calls my big idea, and get into what might be God's better idea that I would never have come up with on my own, of my own thinking, of what's within my 6 inches of space between my ears, as opposed to connecting to the great one mind that we are all connected to and that is a part of each of us. So one of the things that I've used is oracles of one character, what I call oracles, for divining the divine will. Bonnie mentioned this, I think, in her talk, and she talked about how someone, well, I think it's every month you have someone that comes and teaches dowsing, which is a fashion of divining. So I decided that since I was going to talk about this morning, I would use one of the oracles that I have used in the past, which is the medicine cards. And I didn't draw a card because my cat brought me the animal this morning. So I decided, well, this is all in divine order. Right? It's always in divine order. And it's usually a bird or a lizard, so I don't usually always bother to look them up or think about the medicine cards, the Indian and Native American tradition. But this morning it was one of those big moths. She has a little kitty door she goes in and out of, and so she brings me these little treasures and sets them on the carpet there. So when I saw that this was the moth, and then I thought, well, maybe I'll look that up. Well, they don't have moth, but they have butterfly, which is essentially the same thing. And I don't know if you can see the page. Oops, I'm sorry, Skip. But there are 4 questions here to ask yourself. And I thought, well, this is real appropriate that the answers are in the questions. And the questions are about, of course, the concept of the butterfly is transformation. And the questions are about asking yourself, what stage of transformation are you in? As opposed, to the analogy of the butterfly. But I thought, well, that's interesting. And I have angel cards that sit by my door that sometimes I remember to, as I said, I've always known that thinking's my problem. I don't always remember that. But these little angel cards, so I picked one of those up this morning to see what it said, and it said courage. So I'll bring you all into that. The word for the day is courage, just like Sesame Street. I've been watching with my little grandson this last week. I've been in Albuquerque the whole last week. Longer than I had initially intended to stay, but it's been so much fun in so many ways. And he's only 18 months old, but boy, he knows who Elmo is. And so that's the word on the street today, is courage. I have dabbled once in a while with dream interpretation in terms of, trying to delve into what is the subconscious thought process. By the way, if you haven't seen it, you might look at going to see the movie Inside Out, which is, some of you have seen it. I see you're shaking your heads. And I love the line in the Inside Out movie where she's explaining that the subconscious is the place where they send all the troublemakers. So that was kind of cute. But it's a great movie. I'm not sure. I wasn't there with a child, so I don't know how kids actually take it in. It's the latest animated movie from Pixar. And it is showing here in town right now if you're interested to track it down. Anyway, Amy, what's her name? Amy Poehler, whatever her name is, plays Joy. There's 5 emotions inside the head of this child who's not very happy about having to be relocated, being moved, changed, that change word again. And I found it interesting that all the emotions they chose, the one that we would perceive to be positive is joy, who has to kind of counterbalance the other 4 that are anger, sadness, fear. See, I've already forgotten. Maybe there were only 4 to begin with. Pardon? Disgust. Yes, disgust. Yes, this gal that's very trendy dressed in the Pixar thing. Yeah, disgust. The joy has to somehow or another, but actually she's the one that's sort of in charge, so that was a good thing. I felt the way they depicted it. But I've said for years that Disney is the most perversive, subversive entity in our country for spreading the principles of science of mind and love and all of that. So it's just another version of how they're doing it, only this time they actually are showing things that are neurologically, scientifically based in the movie. I heard an interview with getting off tangent here, with the director, producer, co-writer of the movie, where he talked about all the fact-checking they did to make sure that what they were showing and what they were putting out there has neurological science base to it. Anyway, subconscious, that's where I was, right? Yeah. And then I've used visioning, which I highly recommend, where, again, you're asking questions. You're asking these questions as you're in a meditative state, and in a state that you have brought yourself to, that is like what I talked about last month when I was here: compassion, loving kindness, feeling that sense of complete acceptance and love as you're in this meditative state, and these questions are asked of you that are a part of how you get to understanding what is the divine will. The questions, envisioning. If you haven't taken that class here, when it comes up next, please think about taking it. I think you'd find it very, very helpful, as I have. And I'm presently teaching it via Skype in Mexico, so that's been fun too. And then there are other things that I do, which are sort of specific directions kinds of things. I have a friend a number of years who taught me the idea of, well, I have one friend who taught me the first idea, which I love, is before your feet hit the floor, is that you thank God for the good that's about to come to you in the day, and you look around and see God in everything in your room when you first wake up. But another one was, because again, I overthink things and I'm stubborn and I'm not always that mindful about it. It's lead me where you need me and show me in ways I cannot possibly misunderstand. Lead me where you need me and show me in ways I cannot possibly misunderstand. And then there's the one from Course in Miracles that Marianne Williamson talks about, which is, where would you have me go? With whom would you have me speak? And what would you have me say? These types of questions that are looking for maybe a more specific and immediate, in the moment kind of directive are tools that I have found helpful. All of them have the embracing element, though, of this concept of going within, of being open to the answer, being open to the change that answer might bring about or might produce the fear about in your life. And so there's a couple of other things that I used a few months back, 2 or 3 months back when I was here. I don't remember exactly what time it was or what the topic was even, but I remember talking about the pattern interrupter of being in the midst of a problem, midst of something, and talking about singing the hokey pokey, so that you can just lift your spirits. By the way, Marilyn, very uplifting song, but you didn't give me any material this morning. No words, but truly uplifting, truly uplifting. So the songs, so the music is a big part of my world and my life, and I like the idea of a lot of the singing that goes on here and that goes on in our movement, because it's sort of chanting. It's not highly involved lyrics and a lot of permutations on the theme. It's pretty much simple, like I'm one, I'm still, I'm here. So I have a couple of these. One that we made up during the time when Tina and Doug and I were here teaching the 5 gifts for the center for the very first time. And it's just a little card that she provides with the materials. But we made up a chant from it that has a little song to it. Because all of this, none of these things works if I'm not open and willing to accept. And if I haven't put myself in the state of mind where that willingness is at the forefront. So this one from the 5 gifts is, I surrender to the power and presence of God within me. So if I have a moment or a series of moments when things seem to be a little off track, things are off the rails, I try to remember to center myself and to open up to what's happening. Because really, what happens to us, what I've found, what happens to me, and I think this is true for most of us, when we find ourselves in that moment or that series of moments, what's really going on is we're resisting what is. We're resisting the moment. Because we don't like what's happening, or it's not going the way we thought it should, or something's a surprise, or we might have to change. And so we put up some level of fear or resistance about it. So a little chant like that could be helpful to get you to the divine within you, to open up to that. And one that we have in the conference in Mexico that I'm going to go to next week, which is a little bit more cumbersome in English, but the way they translate it is, I'm opening up to sweet surrender at the universal love light of the one. And again, it's about getting yourself into that moment of oneness and withinness and understanding that what seems to be apparently here isn't really what I want to be resisting or getting upset about or whatever. So these are ways that I get myself out of the way, that I get my thinking out of the way, that I get my overthinking out of the way, and that I try to connect with the divine will. So last time I was here, I talked to you a little bit about this concept of the impersonal life, that I had learned about this book from Wayne Dyer called The Impersonal Life, that was written by a fellow named John Benner in 1914. And I offered up to you, and I'll do that again today. Anyone who wants to know how to get the copy of that, if you don't want to bother to Google it and look for it, see me afterwards and I'll email you the link. But basically, it was a channeled book to a Lutheran minister who didn't want to accept that it was his, and so he didn't put his name on it. His wife put his name on it after he died. But in the impersonal life, it is supposedly, being channeled from God. It is the words of God to this person who's the scribe. And so I was thinking about that and reading some more in the impersonal life in this last week, and I thought, this is kind of like the conversations with God before Neil Donald Walsh. And I decided, divining the divine will, conversations with God, maybe Neil has something to say about that, who, by the way, was a practitioner student of Reverend Sandy back in the day when he was only known as Donald, apparently, from the way she tells the story. But, fame brings on different, you have to distinguish yourself from Donald, all the other Donald Walshes, I guess. So I have this book that I went to. It's by Neil Donald Walsh, because this Benner guy, he wrote The Impersonal Life, and that was it. But Walsh is still hanging around, and after his, 3 Conversations with God books, and all the ancillary materials that go with that, he's still continuing to write other things. And this is a book that he wrote right after the economic crash of 2008. This was published in 2009. It's called When Everything Changes, Change Everything. And in here, he actually kind of gives you the clues of how he got to the point of having the blinding flash of the obvious, that he was God, and having his presence with God, and writing those Conversations with God books. But I want to tell you what he has to say in here a little bit about this today, if you permit me. He says that after 15 years from his dramatic experience of God as the real presence in his life, and the flashes of insight keep coming, the moments of awareness endlessly arrive, and the glimpses of the all, in caps, continue to materialize. And what these glimpses show me is that everyone gets these glimpses. Everyone. It isn't that there's one of us who's more privileged or more special or more holy. He's got all those words in quotes. Or more able than everyone else to access wisdom and be provided a direct connection to the divine. There is no chosen one. We are all able, and we are all chosen. And the question is not, to whom does God talk? The question is, who's listening? And he goes on in the next page or two to describe what he calls the soul system, which is his technique or tool for getting in touch with the divine and the divine will for his life, and through which he sort of downloaded from the cosmic download the Conversations with God works. And so I found it interesting, since I'd already decided that my theme was just ask and all that since it turns out that what Donald has is 4 questions here. Now you can't see that. 4 questions that he said shifted his world. So he says, my life changed direction radically when I answered these 4 questions. And his questions were, who I am, not who am I, who I am, where am I, why am I where I am, and then what am I doing here, wherever here is. And he's describing the way he derives his answers in a graphic that he then lays out the understanding of. This is my, as Sandy would call it, my overhead projector. And basically, it's the figure 8 on its side, or the infinity symbol. And in his work, he explains that this is the spiritual realm this is the spiritual realm on the left side, because I think he didn't say anything about it in the book, but I think it's important that he put it on the left brain, right brain kind of thing. And this is the physical realm on the right. And he says basically there's 3 realms in this drawing, and he talks about how the spiritual realm is the realm of absolute truth. The physical realm is the realm of apparent truth. And how do we get from one to the other when we're trying to divine the divine will, which is presumably over here on this side? He describes that the absolute truth, as opposed to the apparent truth, he calls the apparent truth as a relative truth. It's either here or there, up or down, black or white, slow or fast. It's all the duality of the relativity of things that you're able to have an experience in the moment of, okay, it's fast or it's slow. That you have that experience of it. And that over here, life is love and light, not love or light, or love or fear, or good or evil. And over here, it's just love and light. It's all love. And he explains fairly well, probably better than I will, that these aspects of the spiritual, which are the love, the light, the no fear, the no evil, the no, is more about having just this one aspect rather than the relativity or the duality aspects. And that his premise is that God created and continues to create everything that has manifested into form in the physical realm, including us. And we just happen to be the lucky ones to get to the place where we're at an evolution of consciousness that we're aware of ourselves and we're aware of our consciousness. Because essentially what he's saying is that because we are also God, that's our role, that's our purpose too, to create and to continue to create and to recreate our own lives as this experience of God. Because he's only love, or it's only love, or however you want to characterize it, had no contrast, had no relativity, had no experience, only has the knowing. That the spiritual side is all knowing, and the physical side is experiencing. And that the connection between the two, in the center here, he calls the third realm, where he invented a word that's called spiricism. And that spirit, I'm sorry, I didn't say it right. Spirisical. S-P-I-R-I-S-I-C-A-L, spirisical. And it's in the spirisical place that is pure being. And it is the space from which the other 2 realms actually emerged. It is a sort of a crossover, but it's also the point of the fountain of the creation of the others. So he talks about this and how he comes to answer these questions for himself. And he believes that these answers are universally applicable to all of us. So the answer to who I am is pure being. And the answer to where I am becomes I'm in heaven on earth, or some aspect of it. And the answer to why am I where I am, that we come basically as, I forgot now, who was it that called it Earth School? Some teacher of ours way back when called it Earth School. That we've come to Earth School for, he calls it a world of experience. And it's through that experiential aspect of it that we actually learn. Because in the spiritual world, it's already all known. So when we're there, we already have all the knowing we need. He just says that it comes from the benefit of the asking that gives us the opportunity to cross over through this infinity from the physical to the spiritual and to learn what it is we need to learn in order to know what it is we know. And his answer to what am I doing here? Why am I here? What am I doing here? He says we're here for the discovery of self as spirit. And that's that God discovery that we're doing in the process of it all through using the tools that are physical, including our own body, everything that is around us, that We're employing all these for our own experience based on, and this is where I think it's key, based on where and what we have decided about ourselves in the spiritual center, where the subconscious, the conscious, the God within, all of that has made up its own mind as to what our role on the planet is going to be. So I thought that was kind of intriguing to talk about just asking and how he's just asking in that book, saying this is how he got to that flashing experience of knowing and feeling and understanding at a deep, deep level that he is spirit and that God is always present within. And from there, look at the rest of what he's done and how he has spread his exercise of the divine will in his life into ours. Excuse me. I'm going to have to take a drink here. I had this book here too, which is called The Eye of the Eye. The Eye of the Eye. I don't know if you can see it, but it's a little play on words, where I think he sort of sums up the thing about it all. And this book also is questions and answers, like the one that I had last time that I read you from, that I mentioned about how Ernest says, and it's pretty much what you read from this thing called You, about how you get to that going within, that meditative state, and you understand that there is this impersonality there that is aside from, different from just your personality. And that when you make decisions from your personality, you're probably not in touch with the will of God. You're in touch with your own will. So David Hawkins in this book, The Eye of the Eye, excuse me, talks about the will and understanding and comprehending the will. And what he says is that the will is determined by understanding and comprehension, which is in turn influenced by the meaning the meaning we give to it, which is then determined by the context. And out of meaning and context arises value, and from that we make choice. And the will is what energizes the efforts to achieve that which has been valued by virtue of the meaning. And to the worldly, motivation is based on wants and desires, or the seduction of attraction. But those wants and desires in the spiritual realm lose that motivation and force when they become kind of overruled, I guess is the word he's using here, by will and decision. Will, then, in divining will, is thus the basis for spiritual growth and the evolution of our consciousness. Spiritual evolution is almost like a spaceship taking off from Earth's gravity, difficult at first, but finally overcomes the inertia and can leave the Earth's gravity, which he likens to our sort of mundane daily life that's always sort of feeling like it's pulling us back or pulling us down. But revelation replaces discovery. Understanding presents itself and becomes self-revealing through the grace of its own without any effort. And the inner pressure to achieve spiritual awareness becomes replaced by becoming the witness to the truth rather than the seeker of the truth. Effort is replaced by the effortlessness of spontaneous discovery. Essence progressively shines forth through form, which loses its own delineation. And then even essence fades into the domain of the awareness of the existence itself, that within is the self-revealing divinity. And I'd like to close today with some words from Ernest Holmes. When he's talking, and this again is the same book that I brought to you last month. It's called Questions and Answers of the Science of Mind by Ernest Holmes. The question here had more to do with how to concentrate, but he's talking about how to get in touch in your meditation, how to touch that divine, how to feel the essence of that divine. So he says, in your treatment, you claim it now and say something like this: divine mind within me knows all things, knows the answers to my problems, and this mind makes me know consciously just what actions to take. I listen for my inner guidance, and I do make right decisions. And that which is for my highest good is now manifesting in all of my affairs. I know that the spirit of infinite goodness harmonizes into right action for everything in my affairs, and that the absolute intelligence of the divine controls every act of my life. So it's divine will, whether we know it or not. So thank you. That's what I had to share. Namaste. I realize it's time to close.